We're aiming for a 10 millimeter mercury drop in systolic blood pressure, the higher number. That essentially has the same effect as quitting smoking on all-cause mortality. Hypertension affects 1/3 of all adults worldwide, and it's 1/6 of all deaths. Like, it's just such a massive problem. 10.9 million deaths annually. It's the number one cause of heart attacks and strokes. So if you can actually make an impact on that, even a small to moderate one, it'll just have a huge, huge impact. But that 10 millimeter drop in blood pressure essentially means 13% reduced risk of all-cause mortality, all death, 30% reduction in stroke risk, and about a 20 to 25% reduction in heart attack risk. Our mission really is to bridge the gap between medical advice and real-world human action. We're approved as a medical device in Europe as of November 2025, so that was a big milestone. We're absolutely delighted. Yeah, the certifications opened a lot of doors for us.
Hi, I'm Tom Guinness and welcome to the Raising Europe podcast. Here we go behind the scenes with the people building the future of European tech. Today we welcome Tom McCartan to the show. Tom is the CEO and co-founder of Nazata Bio. Nazata Bio is a digital therapeutics company tackling high blood pressure, the number one cause of heart attacks, strokes, and heart failure worldwide. Before founding the business, Tom spent years as a medical doctor and completed his MBA at Trinity College Dublin. If you want to learn how digital therapeutics is reshaping longevity as we know it, you don't want to miss this. So yeah, Tom, it's great to have you here today. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Tom. Thank you for having me.
How are you?
Not bad, not bad. Yeah, it's a good time. We're kind of moving forward with a few things this year. It's been a good start to 2026.
Fantastic. So, I mean, why don't we kick things off? Why don't you tell us a little bit about you? Tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey to date and how you started Nazata.
Brilliant, will do. So yeah, I've always been into science and engineering. I kind of grew up in rural Ireland in a place called 𝐑𝐚𝐢𝐬, and I'm a doctor and engineer by background. So essentially, I guess how things started a little bit is between my 3rd and 4th year of medicine, I got a chance to do an engineering master's in bioengineering. And essentially during that time, I was working on smart inhalers with embedded microphones. And from the acoustics of the lungs, it could predict and demonstrate where the drug was being delivered to make sure it's being delivered to the right part of the lungs. And then my thesis was to look at, could we actually use this to predict and prevent severe asthma attacks in advance, so you could actually catch them early and entirely prevent them. So from there, I guess I finished med school. I worked as a junior doctor in a few different specialties, and then I ended up working on the same project, bringing it forward a bit, working in a clinical trial, and then COVID hit, and essentially our lab had years of experience working on respiratory early warning systems. So myself, my old boss, and good colleague of mine, who are now both advisors to the business, got drafted in to develop the National COVID Early Warning System for Ireland. So what this actually did was any COVID patients that were admitted to Irish hospitals, they were graded on this. So it looked at their age, how fast they were breathing, whether they needed additional oxygen flow or pressure supports, and what that resulted in terms of the oxygen pressure in their blood. From that, it would predict 24 hours in advance how likely they are to need an ICU bed and ventilator. And essentially, on the front end, that was useful early on in the pandemic for medical teams who didn't have experience with COVID because it was an entirely new condition to treat. And on the back end, it was used to redistribute ventilators to different hospitals in the country with a 24-hour leading warning whenever a hospital was going to have an excess need. So yeah, kind of COVID finished up. I finished up the smart inhaler work, and my old boss, Richard Costello, spun that out into a company called 𝐓𝐨Zoom, smart inhaler company. And Yeah, I guess I had a year of scholarship left and I ended up doing an MBA with it and then starting Nazata. And that's kind of where this journey started.
That's amazing. That's really, really impactful work.
Yeah, cheers.
So far.
So far. I was really lucky with all the people who taught me, were very patient and helped me a lot along the way. But yeah, it's been great.
Fantastic. So what was the kind of aha moment or kind of the spark of inspiration you had when starting Nazata?
Yeah, so I guess post-COVID, I'd had really rewarding projects, like very stressful, of course. And I was probably about 25 when I was doing the COVID early warning system work. And then that finished, the smart inhaler work finished. Then there was a gap and I'm like, I kind of have the ability to decide what I'll work on for a long period of time now. So I actually spent most of 2022 looking at what problem I wanted to solve. So looking at major problems in medicine, what's causing most death, most disability, and kind of going from the perspective of clinical proofreading, could I make something useful for this? Engineering proofreading, how difficult will it be to create? What kind of team would you need to create it? Kind of the market analysis to have a viable business. And then, of course, societal benefit analysis. How much will this really impact patients in the real world at the end? So from that, I got drawn into cardiovascular disease because it's a third of all deaths worldwide. And then from there, I was like, okay, if I was to work on one component of cardiovascular disease, what would it be? And it was always high blood pressure. Like hypertension is a third of all, it affects a third of all adults worldwide, and it's a sixth of all deaths. Like it's just such a massive problem. 10.9 million deaths annually. It's the number one cause of heart attacks and strokes. So if you can actually make an impact on that, even a small to moderate one, it'll just have a huge, huge impact.
That's amazing. So why did you choose the name Nazata?
I kind of liked the sound, to be honest. Like most of my focus was elsewhere. Like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to achieve it? And I liked the sound of the word and went with that.
Perfect. And, how big do you think the opportunity can be for Nazata?
So, if we look at it from global perspective, hypertension affects a third of all adults, but by age 65, it'll affect 2/3 of us. So it's huge. It's a major problem in modern public health and healthcare. So for us, we see the 1.4 billion patients in the world. We think we can make a big impact on that. It's a great thing about digital technologies. They're perfectly scalable. And I think healthcare really needs these scalable actual solutions that will reduce workload, it can improve efficiency and provide massive cost savings to health systems. So I think it's pretty big from there. I think a lot of what we do is actually generalizable to other diseases. I think where we really hone in on is the behavioral science of how we change people's behavior. So with high blood pressure, that's often around diet, especially sodium and potassium balance, getting oral nitrates, exercise, especially isometric exercise, where patients are holding a position of resistance, but they're not moving because when it's theorized, it puts a constant pressure on blood vessels, and that helps restore vascular elasticity. So a lot of elements like that, but if you actually really hone in and can robustly change people's behavior long-term in ways that they actually want to change and empower them to do that, can have a massive impact on obesity, diabetes, so many different diseases.
Wow, so big ambitions.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So could you tell us in kind of plain English what the product does today?
Absolutely. So high blood pressure, very much lifestyle driven, high salt, low potassium. That's kind of sedentary lifestyle, kind of really contributes a lot, high stress. So it's always been shown that if you've got patients with high blood pressure in a structured clinic with a dietitian or a clinical exercise specialist, they tend to do very well. They get both of these together, they tend to do extremely well. But because it's a third of the adult population, public health systems never have enough resources to do that. So it just doesn't happen in practice. So we essentially digitize that. So all the elements of diet, exercise, stress reduction, medication adherence, alcohol and weight reduction. And we naturally get the latest research to apply. For myself, I'm on the European Society of Hypertension's Lifestyle and Adherence Working Group. So it's amazing to work with a lot of world-class researchers. But I think the most important thing we do is we really hone in on the behavioral science and how do we empower patients to make these changes that they want themselves to make, but are extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult to actually make. So I think our mission really is to bridge the gap between medical advice and real-world human action.
Yeah. How did you build your MVP?
Yeah, so initially I built a very, very bare bones prototype just using Zapier and automatic messages going out to people, giving them lifestyle advice. And that was really to see if patients would engage, and they actually did. I thought if they're using a really rubbish version of the product, it's a great sign. Like, the problem is real, even if your product at that time isn't amazing. Then from there, I brought in my co-founder and CTO at the start of 2024, Shane O'Neill, who I'd actually met during the bioengineering masters nearly 10 years ago at that stage, and absolute genius when it comes to software engineering. And he started working on it. He had the experience in terms of medical device certification from the masters. And yeah, from there, we started patient testing very early. We had a nephrology center in Göttingen, Germany, which got on board very quickly. We had the British Heart Foundation throughout last year, were fantastic, provided us a lot of testing from our partners there. And over time, I think we just built up. Like mid-2024, we had a nice version running on our own app on the front end. We had our own algorithms for the personalization on the back end. And yeah, I think from there, that was probably the MVP we could show like clinicians, health centers, hospitals. And every step in the way, we've just been constantly testing, improving, taking more batches of patients, talking to them and seeing, okay, here were their problems, how can we address those better? And over time, really honing in on how to really empower them to make these behavioral changes.
Right. And so when it comes to the changes in behavior, does it rely on the patient to input lots of data every day, or is it quite seamless?
Depends on which behavior you're changing and which the patient wants to change. So I think, well, from the start, we expected it, but one thing we definitely learned was that every patient is different. Some patients really motivated, coming from a great background where they have a huge amount of health information already. Others might be new diagnosis. They might be having a harder time with other aspects of their life and completely different pictures. So I think, I think so many different behaviors needed to hone in on an individual level, talk to a lot of patients on what worked for them, what didn't, and over time improve how we personalize each element, how we adapt it, depending on how a patient is progressing.
Okay, amazing. And so when it comes to the regulatory approvals for the product, where are you guys in that process?
Yeah, so we're approved as a medical device in Europe as of November 2025. So that was a big milestone. We're absolutely delighted. It opens a lot of doors, allows us to run clinical studies easier, and it's the end of a great deal of paperwork. So it's a big celebration on the team. My CTO Shane did amazing work there. Just, yeah, setting up test cases on the software side, working through on our risk analysis and our quality management systems. So that's brilliant. And Europe, as I'm sure you're probably familiar with in general, is normally quite stringent when it comes to rules. So it's often easier to enter other jurisdictions after that. So there's kind of streamlined programs to get FDA certification in the US, or other places like Australia. It's normally a fast track once you're approved in Europe. So that's great from that side. And that's just opened the door for a lot of studies. So we have a study with the Irish Heart Foundation starting. First patients come through the door in the next 2 weeks, which is terrific. We're really excited for that. And then we have a randomized control trial in Germany starting later this year, centered in Hanover. So really excited for that. And that's a study we kind of agreed with the German FDA that essentially we do that right, we get positive results, and then we get reimbursement all across Germany. So yeah, the certifications opened a lot of doors for us.
That's fantastic news. Congratulations.
Thanks.
So when it comes to other solutions to the problem in the market, what is Nazata's kind of unfair advantage that it has versus other competitors in the market?
Yeah, so I think firstly, for hypertension, it's very neglected. The market really isn't that well developed in terms of digital offerings. So there's some quite effective drugs, but even with the drugs, less than 50% of patients worldwide, even in countries with better health systems like Germany, are controlled. So even with all those medications, Germany has about a 45% control rate. Ireland and the UK have about 40% control rate, really small. So I think there's just a gap in the market there, firstly. But in terms of some other digital therapeutics or offerings, one, I think we've really gone deep on the behavioral side. A lot of them are able to provide information, which is very useful and have provided great benefit to patients. But I think our key differentiator is honing in on the behavioral science. When we first started out, we architected Heart Shield on a lot of self-determination theory, nudge theory. We have a brilliant behavioral psychologist, Pádraig Walsh, who was really insightful in terms of how we actually adapt for different patients, how we build things to make all these small changes that add up really easy for patients. So I think that behavioral science focus is kind of the long-term moat for us. Also, the fact that we're entirely digital. So there are some digital therapeutics that are kind of a hybrid model, and they say might have a dietitian or a psychologist or a psychotherapist involved on video calls, which are great and provide really beneficial treatments to patients, but they're not scalable in the same way something purely digital is.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And so when it comes to your customer, I know that there's multiple ways you can look at that with Nazata.
That's it.
Who is the customer, and what's your ideal customer?
Yeah, so it's a big question. So Germany, we have the agreement with the German FDA essentially for the clinical trial that will get us reimbursement. So they approve us. The payer is the public insurance system in Germany, and then we're prescribed by doctors. So we'd kind of operate in a B2B model where doctors would prescribe us, because essentially hypertension is an asymptomatic disease in a lot of cases. Most patients don't have a lot in terms of symptoms. So it's often the doctors who kind of push a lot in terms of saying, okay, you might not feel anything, but you could have a heart attack or stroke. So I think it's really good that it's publicly paid in Germany, and then doctors are able to just prescribe it for patients. So from that side, I think hypertension specialist centers, which are normally nephrologists or kidney doctors in Germany, they see a huge number of hypertension patients, as well as GPs day to day who might have a few new diagnoses of hypertension, but otherwise probably about 30 to 40% of their patients will have high blood pressure, and they can just catch these patients incidentally and say, okay, why don't we try this? This drug hasn't worked, or you've just been diagnosed. Let's see how you get on with lifestyle. Then for patients, I think the ideal patient, I would say between the age of 40 and 60 is probably the sweet spot. Obviously, we aim to address as wide a branch as possible because heart attacks and strokes, so important. You can't really neglect anyone. But I think particularly in women perimenopause, once estrogen levels go down, the protective properties just drop. And normally estrogen keeps blood vessel walls very elastic. And once that goes, they get a sudden increase in their blood pressure, which can be quite dangerous. They get a rapidly increased rate of heart attacks and strokes. And I find like women of that age are normally extremely health conscious and able to actually make these changes. So generally very good at actually making these real world efforts, understanding the problem and being proactive about it. So, yeah.
Right. If someone were to use Nazata and make these lifestyle changes that's kind of recommended by the app, what kind of impact would that have on their lives?
Yeah. So we're aiming for a 10 millimeter mercury drop in systolic blood pressure, the higher number. So that essentially has the same effect as quitting smoking on all-cause mortality. And that's kind of our aim in the next 2 years. We think we can get an even bigger impact than that as we develop, as we get more of a data set to actually improve on, as we get more experience with patients and doctors. We think we can go even beyond that. But that 10 millimeter drop in blood pressure essentially means 13% reduced risk of all-cause mortality, all death, 30% reduction in stroke risk, and about a 20 to 25% reduction in heart attack risk. So that's not even counting all the other benefits of eating better, exercising more that are going to impact obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance. So yeah, that's our aim.
Impactful. And when it comes to the B2B side of things, selling to the doctors around the world, how do you win customers in that case? Yeah,
I think good quality evidence, making a great product and running really good clinical studies. Like doctors, they want solutions that work. They're willing to use them. They're able to interpret these papers. And I think if you show, look, we monitored these patients over a period of time. It was very successful. We got this drop. These were our confounders. These are all the elements we looked at to make sure there wasn't anything else kind of pushing the data one way or the other. And you present that in a good quality paper and communicate it. I think that's really important. Another element, I think, is actually aligning with their workflows. So doctors are extremely busy. So a GP, for example, or family medicine practitioner in Germany has on average 7.6 minutes with a patient for a consultation. In Ireland or the UK, it's normally closer to about 9.5, 10 minutes. But this is extremely little time. You don't have time to actually talk through patients' diet, how much they know in terms of hypertension, where the salt comes in their diet, where the potassium comes from, their exercise, any behavioral blockers that might be impacting their health-related behaviors. You barely have enough time to measure blood pressure, talk about it, look at their drugs and their results, and actually write a prescription in that amount of time. So one thing we do is we actually take all the monitoring of the blood pressure over time from the patient's own blood pressure monitor. We aggregate that really well. We present a nice output showing exactly what the most important numbers are for the clinician to make an educated decision. And we essentially cover all those aspects that I think doctors really want to improve in their patients' lives, but just don't have time Like from my own work as a junior doctor working in North Dublin, I was on some very busy services where you get these patients, you do the most important things, but there'd be 3 or 4 things in the back of your head, and you'd be thinking, if I had more time, I could optimize this, this, and this, but I need to see the next 9 patients in this clinic. I need to do just the most important thing for each one and send them on their way. But I would love to actually optimize all these other elements and really bring in holistic care into it. So I think having experienced that problem, I think it's a huge, huge incentive and plus for doctors to be able to actually address all these elements that they just don't have the time to do in normal practice.
We're here on the outskirts of Dublin.
Yes.
In beautiful Leixlip.
Incredibly beautiful.
Incredibly. So is the whole team based here in Ireland?
So not quite. Like, we're mainly Dublin centric. So myself, my CTO, and our behavioral psychologist are here, as well as the fractional CFO we just brought on. But our designer Vlad is actually out in Ukraine, and he's been terrific, big part of the team. We have a lot of contractors. So the nature of medical device business, even though what we make is purely software, we are still certified as a medical device. But the nature of that, a lot of elements like certification, you work very intensely for a period of time, and then you're certified. There's a lot less work. So we get a lot of contractors for elements like that, but mostly Dublin centric. But yeah, we do have a few people based in Ukraine, US, and Germany in terms of contractors.
Amazing. And so how would you describe the culture of the business?
So I think we're really curious, and we really love honing into the science, really honing into the problem and looking at how can we solve this, which isn't always easy with human behavior. Like, all these problems, well known, people should eat better, people should take their medications more regularly, people should be less stressed, but all very difficult problems to solve. So I think we have a very good culture for looking at a problem from first principles, not shooting ideas down in the early stages as we kind of brainstorm and look at how to solve these problems, and pulling in a lot of different disciplines. I think we're very good at listening to each other's perspectives between medicine, engineering, psychology, and often those different perspectives are really, really useful and force us to think in ways that we otherwise wouldn't. So that's a huge part. We're massively invested in the problem. We love these elements. Like, I chose to work in high blood pressure because it's the 6th of all deaths worldwide. Because if you can actually reduce it early, you're preventing so much early mortality, you're preventing so much disability from strokes, heart attack, heart failure, and you can just have a massive, massive impact. So we're very much mission driven in that regard. So yeah,
amazing.
I'm really lucky to work with the team. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, great things so far. So
cheers.
If we take a step back and look at the entirety of the business, how does this translate into euros and cents?
Yeah, so in Germany, there's a reimbursement system called 𝐑𝐚𝐢𝐬, which is what we're working towards. That's what we've kind of agreed our clinical study parameters with the German FDA for. So if that study gets positive results, we get reimbursement across the entire country in Germany, which is fantastic. 80 million people in Germany. There are about 22 million people with high blood pressure there. And generally, there's more or less set price from the public health insurers, which is typically between 190 and 240 euros per prescription, which covers 3 months. So usually centered about 225 euro per prescription. So at 22 million people in Germany, that's about 4.95 billion euros. Obviously, not all of those are addressable, but also you can get represcriptions. So represcription rates are about 20% at the moment. They may get higher over time as 𝐑𝐚𝐢𝐬s become more of a kind of set part of doctors' workflows. I think realistically, only about 60% of hypertension patients in the medium term are what we're focusing on for HeartShield. I think some people, one, they don't use smartphones, particularly on the older range. They might be very complex. They might have severe chronic kidney disease or other elements that might make them a bit nuanced, and you're actually treating those multi-morbid conditions more than you're just treating hypertension, which we'd like to come in and be able to treat these multi-morbid, multiple diseases coming in at once situations later. But for now, we want to focus on hypertension really well. So with that 60% in Germany at the €225 reimbursement rate, 20% represcription rate. So it's looking at about €3.5 billion addressable. I think our medium-term aim would be 17 million in revenue, which, looking at the throughput of a hypertension specialist in Germany, probably means about 130 hypertension specialists who really use HeartShield as a routine part of their practice. So each specialist would see about 30 to 60 hypertension patients per week, and we'd aim to get about 10 prescriptions a week from each of those. So at that rate, if we got 130 doctors on board like that, then we hit our kind of medium-term goal of 17 million in annual revenue from Germany.
Okay, and Germany alone?
From Germany alone. We are looking at other markets after Germany, but we're very much focused at the moment. For the stage we're at, the fact that Germany has this great reimbursement system, patient pays nothing, huge benefit for patient, huge benefit for public health system. That's what we're focusing on right now. US and France, we'll definitely be looking at in the near future. But Germany's focus for now.
Amazing. So when it comes to investor support, who's backing the business, and how did you find the fundraising process so far?
Yeah, so we've been really lucky so far. I think the fact that our mission is so important, a lot of people got behind it really early on. We got some great media coverage, got covered in Forbes, did the main stage and web summit for a presentation, and we actually had angels reach out to us, which was terrific. So we're oversubscribed when we raised before, which has been great. The investors have been brilliant, really got behind us and the mission, introduced us to more investors. Some of them are doctors and professors who've been real value add investors who can look over a clinical trial protocol and say, okay, this is great. Have you thought about changing this or adding this step? Or maybe if we measured this could open a new avenue down the line. So we've been really lucky like that. And yeah, no complaints.
That's fantastic. So what's next for Nazata?
Yeah, so
where do you see the business going in the next 18 to 24 months?
Yeah, so it'll be an exciting time coming off the back of certification as a medical device across Europe. We're now starting the study with the Irish Heart Foundation. We have our randomized control trial centered in Hanover later this year. So that should get us reimbursement in 𝐑𝐚𝐢𝐬, which we'd expect probably Q3 of 2027 at the moment. Obviously, studies, things can take longer to get patients on board, but we think we're there at the moment. We might run an additional study in Ireland for kind of very complex hypertension patients, which will be interesting. We're about to open a fundraise of about €800,000 now, so that should be nice. Pre-seed fundraise, get us through our clinical trial, get us reimbursement in the main healthcare market in Europe, and then raise our seed on the back of that. Probably Q3 of 2027. And at the same time, on the tech and product level, Shane has worked on some really brilliant elements. So we've kind of, as we progressed, we saw that if we're actually really making a bridge between medical advice and real human action, we can actually apply that to so many other diseases. So he's built a great AI platform that allows us to far more rapidly adapt to other diseases and take not only the technical building blocks we've learned from building HeartShield, but also the behavioral science ones that'll really help us robustly change people's behavior for the long term.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
That's it. I think we're on to our personal takeaways and fun questions.
Great.
So based on your experience to date, what advice would you give to the next batch of founders and entrepreneurs?
I would say validate your problem really early. Not even your first idea for the solution. Make sure it's a real problem. One of my favorite books for any kind of startup work is the Mom Test. I think it really, really gives a great guide on how to actually look at a problem from first principles, really talk to people without mentioning your solution, without even directly mentioning the problem often, kind of skirting around it to really make sure that's a real problem for people and people really want it solved. So yeah, I would say that's my number one advice. Validate early with real users. Yeah.
Amazing. Outside of building the business, what do you do for fun?
Yeah, so I like to keep fit. I like to run, work out, but I'd say really anything nerdy. So video games, tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons, reading sci-fi and fantasy, anything tech or science-based. All big passions of mine.
Love it. If you weren't a startup founder, what would you be?
I think I'd still be working on medical technologies. I think similar to when I was working on the smart inhalers, a role like that, where I may not have as much power to influence big picture stuff, but still working on something really important that can make a big impact to patients' lives.
Amazing. What are your top 3 films you'd recommend?
I think Princess Mononoke.
Love it.
Yeah, real favorite. I love Hayao Miyazaki. 12 Angry Men, and then The Lives of Others.
Great.
German film about a Stasi agent who really becomes emotionally involved with the people he's spying on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, great movie.
What are 3 books you'd recommend?
Let's see.
I know you said the Mom Test.
Yeah, for startup founders, absolutely the Mom Test. That's number 1. I think in general, I really love Brandon Sanderson, fantasy authors' books. Words of Radiance is probably my favorite book of his. It's also the second book in a series and over 1,000 pages long, so it's not the most accessible. He has a great novella called The Emperor's Soul, which is 100 pages long and normally what I advise to people. But his work, probably Words of Radiance would be in the top 3. And then one I read recently that I thought was really excellent was a sci-fi book called Blind Sight that delved deep into kind of speculative fiction of what you could do in terms of neuroscience and cognition. So that was a book that really struck me as impactful lately.
Fantastic. Final question. Who's your celebrity lookalike?
I think I'd have to say younger Ewan McGregor, kind of Clone Wars era. Beard, longer hair and that.
Perfect.
So
Okay, well, Tom, thank you so much for coming in today.
It's been such a pleasure.
Great to have you on the show. I have a quick favor to ask you. Raising Europe is a community-supported channel. If you find that our content has been valuable to you or has helped you in any way, please hit the subscribe button. It's one quick, free, easy way for you to support the channel and help us make our production better each and every week. Thank you so much for joining us on our journey so far. Without you, none of this would be possible.